Okay, I guess let's get started. I think everybody who's here is going to be here. You all are here hopefully for the artificial intelligence public meeting. Before we get started, I have a sign-in sheet that, if you don't mind signing in, and oh, thank you. I have an extra pen, I think, somewhere. Here. To begin with, my name is Brian Bresland. I am the co-chair of the task force committee. I guess first I'll go over the agenda for tonight. First, I think just because it's such a light crowd, let's give introductions. Maybe tell us who you are, how'd you hear about us, and anything else you'd like to add. Why what brought you here tonight? From there, I'll give a little background on the task force, how it was established, when it was established, what we've been doing over the past year or so, and where we're going from here. And then finally, what we really want to have happen tonight is hear from you, the audience, about any public comment you have about artificial intelligence. It's the devil. It's it's the best thing ever. It's it's going to ruin the economy. The jobs are going to get taken away, or it's going to create all these jobs. We'd really like to hear from you about your thoughts from that. And then finally, if there's no public comment, we'll open it up to discussion. If you have any questions for us, we'll try to answer them for you. If we can't answer them for you, perhaps one of the other audience members can. Okay, so to begin with, again, Brian Bresland. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'm Gene Santos. I'm actually a professor of engineering here at Dartmouth College. I do AI research.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Segali. I'm the Director of Policy, Planning, and Research at the Vermont Agency of Transportation.
I'm Ryan Flanagan. I'm with Agency of Commerce, and I'm the Administrative Coordinator for the group. I do just want to pass it around the room. Sure. Okay.
I'm Grace Ellison. I'm a reporter with VT Digger.
I'm Peter Rubinier. I'm a freelance business journalist out of Montpelier.
Jeff Chu. I'm CTO of a medical device product development company. We do a lot of AI work in our work. I'm just curious to know what other people are doing in this field.
I'm Keith Tukey. I just moved to Vermont, where I'm teaching computer science at VTC, and I've been interested in artificial intelligence for a very long time.
I'm Paige Greenfield. I'm a planner with the Regional Planning Commission of this region.
I'm Devin Bates. I'm a reporter with Local 22 and Local 44.
I'm Marco Staffney. I'm the director of the Monshire.
Thank you.
Okay, a little background on the task force. I believe around May of 2018, the task force was established by the legislature. One of the task force members, Brian Chena, he's one of the state representatives. He was the one who championed the bill and got it through the legislature. I believe we held our first meeting around September of 2018, so we've been going at it for about a year now. Part of the bill, the requirements of this task force in the bill was to, I guess, the first was to provide a status update report to the legislature about where we were at the time. And then the second thing that we were required to do as part of the legislature was to address the following items. So we were to provide a summary of the development and current use of artificial intelligence in Vermont, provide a proposal for the definition of artificial intelligence if needed, a proposal for state regulation of artificial intelligence if needed, a proposal for the responsible and ethical development of artificial intelligence in the state, including an identification of the potential risks and benefits of such development, and then finally, a recommendation on whether the General Assembly should establish a permanent commission to study the artificial intelligence field. Thus far, we've submitted a status update report in February of this year to the Senate Government Operations Committee. And then as part of the original bill, we were supposed to submit the final report in June of this year. And back in February, we determined that that was just not enough time considering the subject matter. So back in February, we asked the legislature to come up with an amendment, and they did. And so we had additional meetings added to this amendment, and then the final report is now due on or before January 15th of 2020. The task force is comprised of 14 members, broad range in terms of ages, professions, and artificial intelligence background. The youngest member is still in high school, and then oldest members are, retirees or semi-retirees. In terms of professions, again, that's a broad range. We have lawyers, doctors, people on, secretaries or their appointees from government, this various government agencies, judges, and then finally, there's a broad range of artificial intelligence know-how. I would consider myself on the lower spectrum of artificial intelligence, and then there's the people who have spent their entire careers working in AI. Thus far, we've held approximately monthly meetings as a group. First couple meetings, we were just trying to figure out how do we solve the task at hand, which is addressing those things I've mentioned previously. We decided to speak with as many individuals in various industries, basically asking them the same question that was asked upon us from the legislature. We have spoken to the medical industry, transportation industry, law enforcement, criminal justice, technology, manufacturing, agricultural, natural resources, and the construction industry. There's probably a couple more that I'm missing. So tonight is the third public meeting. First public meeting was in May in Burlington at Makerspace. Second public meeting was in July at Northern Vermont University, Linden, Vermont. And then from here, we have two more scheduled public meetings. One is October 10th in Manchester. And then finally, we have another meeting in at the Essex Fairgrounds. It's Tech Jam. Yep. So from there, after the 17th, hopefully off to the races and developing a final report to the legislature. So I guess thus far we have some tentative recommendations that we've formulated. I can provide you right now. So they are currently, we would recommend a permanent AI commission as a freestanding body with a diverse membership charged with studying and making recommendations to the legislature. We would also recommend an AI code of ethics based on the EU code, but shortened and simplified. And then we would not be recommending any specific regulations at this time. The need for it and any specifics could be determined by the AI Commission. And then finally, part of the legislature was to provide a definition of artificial intelligence. We really still haven't come up with a definition yet. One definition that we've used, and it's shown there, is a program with the ability to learn and perform tasks as well or better than humans. Other people may have different, definitions of what AI is or is not. I guess with that, did I miss anything, or is there anything you guys would like to add?
Maybe I'll just say something quick. I think one of the most interesting pieces of this task force, and this is why we also really love to hear from you folks on, your thoughts about this, is that we have a wide variety, as Brian was mentioning, of task force members. So, some particulars. We have, representatives from the ACLU. We have a representative from the AFL-CIO. We have a representative from the Social Workers Union. Social Workers Union. I mean, and, like one of the retirees he was talking about is actually an ex-Chief Justice, a retired Chief Justice, I'm sorry.
I have a slide on the map.
You have a slide? Oh, okay, yeah. And so it has, been very good at terms of, considering all different aspects. And again, for the public hearing for us, we would like to, hear more thoughts, get, what concerns are, and we go from there. And says, Joe, you want to say anything?
No, that's great.
Okay. Does anybody want to make a public comment?
Could you, first of all, reiterate that working tentative definition again, and then also summarize for us what you've learned in your previous, I think, 3 sessions or 2 sessions?
From the public?
In public meetings.
Okay. I guess I wouldn't speak for everybody else, but for the public meetings, I feel like generally the public is just curious about what's going to happen, what implications it has to them. Again, what are the benefits? What are the disadvantages? One topic at the last meeting in July in Linden was job loss or job transfer. Do you want to?
Sure, I'll take it.
So what I've learned so far, especially in the process that we've gone through over the last year, listening to different people from different areas of the economy and sector and so on, was I think it's still really early. And if artificial intelligence is really the ability for computers and other systems to make decisions, to evaluate the environment around it and then make decisions about what to do next, it doesn't seem like we're quite there yet, but there's like the beginnings of it in different sectors, even in agriculture, and it's pretty amazing. And so I was feeling like, okay, this is probably a really good time for us to start thinking about this, because I think we can all conceptualize what, the risks and the benefits are. And so it probably makes sense to get kind of started on the ground floor. But, I would like to hear more about what's going on out there, and are we missing something? Is there something that's going on right now that we just haven't heard from anybody yet on it? So that's kind of where I'm at, is like, I feel like this is just starting, and I'm in the transportation field, and I've been involved with automated vehicles and getting prepared for automated vehicles in Vermont. And, there's a lot of promise to that technology, but for vehicles to truly be automated and driving themselves, it's still a little, there's still a few more years to go before that actually happens. And I think I'm starting to see that seems somewhat common in other fields as well.
So a couple of things I can also add on top on that is, among the things we heard from, I was at the Burlington hearing, so I can't speak to the Linden hearing, but among the things I heard were also, is there ways of Vermont supporting artificial intelligence technology? Is there a way of, making sure we look at costs and benefits with respect to the state itself? I would have to say that in the Burlington meeting, there was a number of very interesting questions regarding policies, such that, people talk about, let's just talk about AI job loss. If you're thinking about AI job loss, is there a way, for example, maybe like an AI employment tax? Things like that. These are part of the discussions that were very enlightening of, how do people who know about some aspects of AI, how do people who know about some aspects of government, how people who know about aspect technology, should we regulate? Should we regulate to help do something? Those are a lot of the issues that came up during the public hearings. On top of, curiosity of how it's going to affect us, is it going to change anything? And also reality checks, where we are. As Joe said, I also believe we're in very early stages of AI. we have applied a lot of AI out there. You know, some of the most common things like face recognition, those of you who've been following, reading about that, you know, like San Francisco banning it, you know, there are lots of concerns there. But also in its own ways is that that's just one sliver of the technology.
I was at the July meeting. I would say very similar topics were discussed. Vermont's tax-based system is based on income, and what happens if jobs aren't there? How do you get that tax base? Because there's a certain amount that Vermont needs for taxes. The same question brought up is, do you tax a robot, or who owns the robot, or something to that effect? And then similarly, we were talking about again the implications of autonomous vehicles. Specifically, I'm a civil engineer. I would do a lot of work for VTrans, and it reads based on center line, right? White edge line, yellow center line.
Well, ultimately, it won't need to do that
in the future.
Yeah, right. Just be able to interpret. The question, what Brian was saying is that, well, there's kind of this perception there that automated vehicles need to be able to see the center line and the edge line, the white line on the right. Yeah. And some of the technology, that's true, and some of the early technology, but for it to really proliferate across the country, and like in Vermont, think about our gravel roads, right? There's no lines on the gravel roads.
That's where I was going.
Yeah. And there's, and so when the roads are snow covered as well, whether they're paved or gravel, like how, the technology, just like a human, is going to have to be able to interpret the environment around it and know how to move itself through that environment. And that's like true AI, right? Because it will have learned, through experience, just like a human driver does. And again, conceptually, it'll learn and then be able to apply what it's learned to move safely.
Could I recommend that you start with a definition of several key needs in the state? They could be in transportation, healthcare, and then find if there are AI-like solutions which are impending, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years, become commercial in terms of commercialization in the country, and whether they're viable in Vermont. Because I don't think you want to be in a situation of talking about a solution, waiting, searching for a problem. I think you want to figure out the problems and marry them to advanced computer use. The area that I would myself have some passing, I'm a journalist, so I don't do anything honest, I just report on it. Two other folks here. The area that I would look at would be remote diagnostics in healthcare, which is a classic, seems to me, application of machine learning. And Vermont is not going to do anything. It's going to be applied, developed in other environments. You could do a tremendous help by defining some paradigms of, let's say, in healthcare, of diagnostics, triaging that needs, which can be fairly well defined, and then looking at what AI solutions are out there. And you could do that for in other areas as well. And then that allows us, lay people, to understand what this is about. Okay. Now, I wouldn't in any way denigrate the issue of privacy because I think that's absolutely critical. But if AI is going to have a future in Vermont, as it is in Nebraska or Texas, it will be because probably the private sector, in alliance with the public sector, finds that there's some very real needs that are being met in a way that's economic.
So do you think it'd be fair to say, like, you're talking about being be strategic about what AI can do for us in Vermont, understand what the issues are, and then how it can sort of address those gaps.
Yeah, but it's got to start with the definition need. And take an example of fiber optic in rural areas. You can talk about doing 200 or 500 megabytes speed with fiber optic and celebrate the technology. But you can also do another way, which is to look at the amount of population in the state which does not have access to cable. Cable being kind of a simple way of high speed. I mean, that cable will give you high speed. And it's quite possible that there's going to be no, as far as I can see, no major development, expansion of fiber, of cable, because the economics are pretty well defined. But if you can start with where there's a need for faster speeds, you define that, and then you figure out ways of applying a solution, which, using this analogy, might be through EC fiber kind of models, which could be replicated around the country, around the state. So you take an area of one. I don't want to harp on healthcare, but it's an area of remote diagnostics. You look at where are the remote diagnostic, where are the diagnostic shortfalls of a significant size, and can advanced computerization solve that? Meet the diagnostic need.
Are you also thinking about making policy and regulations thinking about making policies and regulations in that direction? Like, for example, what you're saying is that while privacy and data, it's not something I shouldn't say it's not something we would focus on, but just based on your statement, those could also be, I guess, potentially built into whatever forward-thinking policy. So I should say that forward-thinking policy and regulations, is that something?
Yeah, I think policy and policy, including privacy issues and other issues of liability. I'm mainly writing about insurance, and AIs can vastly complicate and also streamline insurance. Just get the issue of who's liable for something. Okay, and like cars. I mean, who's liable when there's a car crash, and the car's an autonomous vehicle, is it a software firm or whatever. So it would be enormously helpful that Montpelier has a group of people who are paying attention to this and have to be responsible to show up once a year and show what they've been doing. That would be enormously valuable.
So one of the questions that, can you guys hear me?
Sorry. No.
So just to see if I can spark any other comments, but what we've been asked to do is identify any potential risks and benefits of AI development. So this gentleman was kind of just laying some of that out. What do other folks think? Any other?
Yeah, I have two comments on that. I mean, I work in a very, very heavily regulated space, right? I develop medical products.
What kind of products?
Medical device products,
okay.
So FDA. And I think there's two perspectives that I have. One is, what's the state's role with industry regulations like the FDA and other standards that exist? And where does that come into play? Where does that boundary exist? Is the state just mostly focused on policy, and the industry practices are being implemented by the industry regulatory bodies? And then the second comment I have is more along some of what this gentleman was saying. And, in terms of AI, we've been using neural networks in our products since 2000. So they've been around forever. It's only come to light because the accessibility of it is so easy now. Anyone can download Python, download some toolkits, and next thing you know, you're developing neural networks. I think you have to be careful about the subcategories of neural networks or machine learning in general. In our FDA world, there are products in the market today that implement, like we have, machine learning, but those have always been fixed algorithms. So these are things that have been trained on a data set, and the output's very known, and you could rigorously test it, evaluate it, and plan for change. I think the challenge that we have, that everyone's struggling with, including the FDA, is to continuously learn AI algorithms. So these are the ones that are completely automatically adjusting based on data they're receiving and learning from that data. And that becomes a little bit ambiguous because you don't know how to test for it. You only can challenge it, and you don't know what's rigorous enough. And so I think for me, it's getting some of that clarity, because I think people are afraid when they hear the words AI. And to be honest, AI has been around for machine learning, data science, whatever you want to call it, has been around for decades. It hasn't changed. People have been doing this forever. There's products that we have in our everyday homes that probably implement some form of that today. So it is scary when you hear about it, particularly autonomous and learning algorithms. But I think it's here. It's readily available. So those are my 2 comments.
Could we dig a little deeper on sort of your thoughts and experience, especially should it be policy or should it be regulation or should it be, industrial? I mean, it's specific, especially to your area.
Yeah, I think on the industry side, I think industry usually does a pretty good job of maintaining and regulating themselves. I think it's in the best, particularly with the FDA, there are a lot of regulatory bodies that exist that help provide the standards that we have to meet to get a product on the market. And so it's been very thoughtful. And to be honest, the guidance documents that the FDA put out for machine learning algorithms and software as a medical device is very thoughtful, and because they got the stakeholders involved. And it's by industry. I think getting the right stakeholders in that industry, understanding best practices, understanding the issues and the people that are involved is the best way to create those sort of regulations. I'm still trying to figure out, on your role, when you're coming up with suggestions and recommendations, where does it start and where does it end? Where is there overlap? You could run into, we have the same issue. We develop stuff in the US, we still have to get approval. Sometimes the standards aren't harmonized across countries, and so you have to go and meet some other standard. But what you don't want to do is have to meet 50 different standards as you put a product out there, right? That's sort of an obstacle to innovation.
One thing for sure, what this task force is doing, we, like Brian was explaining, we all have different levels of expertise or lack thereof, in this field, and we're just getting the ball started more than anything else. And this task force is nowhere, can't even be close to coming to even thinking about how to regulate or even how to establish any real hardcore policies, and so that's why I think maybe the commission, some sort of commission that brings, more stakeholders together, as you put it, and really, monitoring what's going on and then suggesting policies as things kind of reveal themselves a little bit, because I don't know how to predict how things are going to change, right? So why would you try to regulate something that you don't really even understand yet? So, but there seems to be a real need to stay on top of it.
And I think there's also the ability, the reason I'm here is I like to hear from other industries to see what other people are doing from other spaces, because obviously, I'm in a silo. I'm stuck in a vertical market, that's all I know. And so there might be other ways to evaluate and look at things and be open-minded about that.
Just one more follow-up to that is, one of our tasks is also to figure out, AI is coming, not necessarily just looking from a regulatory point of view, is there anything we should be doing or restructuring or something in state government that would help encourage, I'm just going to, with air quotes, right development of AI. And so that's probably one of our other really big struggling points as well, and that's why we hope to, if folks have thoughts on that, what they've run into also.
And so that investment, let me just make sure I understand it a little bit better. Are you looking for investments to improve how operations of the state, or?
All that. It could be just, whether the state just goes by and does direct investments, and we know that there's, lack of a better term, there's silos of that makes it kind of hard also. But also, what have people run into that might have been barriers, to, moving forward on technology in whatever form that involves the state. Did I think I covered that?
Yeah.
And do you think they're even open to suggesting that, in forms of revenue generation or maybe a workforce that improves? Is that all on the table as well?
It's pretty wide open, I think.
Yes. One of the things that I've noticed over the years is the shrinking definition of artificial intelligence. At one time, people said same as checker player, if human That's artificial intelligence. Now you've got all these games. That's not called artificial intelligence anymore. Things that databases do would have been called artificial intelligence at one time. Now they aren't. So one thing I think you might need to discuss, automation is a really, really, really broad topic. But since every time something gets put into use in practice, they stop calling it artificial intelligence, where are we going to draw the line?
That's been our long debate with each other and trying to, how should I say, our very first meeting, we spent way too much of, I shouldn't say way too much, that's just me. We spent a lot of time just trying to figure out what each other's definitions of AI are, and I agree with you. I've seen it. AI starts off as magic. This is what I see in its career. But once you get something working, it's no longer magic, hence it's no longer AI. And so I'm just going to give you my own definition, my current definition, because it's also evolving, scary enough. But my own current definition is that AI is any man-made system that's making a decision from a whole variety of decisions. So I'm just going to keep it at that. Because then what that means is that if it's going to make that decision and there's alternatives, somehow it's weighed all those alternatives. To me, that's what, for human intelligence, that's what we do all the time. And I'll even say that, for example, the tragedy with the Boeing 737 MAX. I classify, people will call that just basic automation, but I also classify that also as a type of AI. Because it made a decision. Should it force the nose down or not? And granted, it has all these inputs, but that is still a decision made. But that's me, so I probably had the broadest one. I sometimes joke that this was probably about 10, 15 years ago. I don't know how many people here have heard of the term fuzzy logic, good and bad connotations or weird connotations, but it's like, when they built the first fuzzy logic toaster to give you the perfect toast, in a way, it says, yeah, I'd be willing to call that AI because somehow it's making a decision that this is the perfect toast for people.
So state that again. I think your definition is really quite useful. Just repeat that.
Okay, my definition of AI is any man-made system that makes a decision from makes decisions from a whole host of other possible answers.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay. Well, that opens up in an extraordinary way, because you could spend several hours just talking about personal assistants at home. Okay. What kind of music is related to Rolling Stones music to play. Okay. And that raises all kinds of interesting issues, because what you could be doing here is basically an educational process of defining, helping people understand the scope of AI in their lives. And the way that you defined it's huge. Okay. I would try to, as well as if it was general education function, I would try to identify some needs of households and businesses and governments in Vermont, which are significant and which appear to have an AI solution available, commercial solution available in the next 3 to 5 years, so that people can focus on things that are within the planning horizon. Well, that's the planning horizon of home construction, of car purchasing, of healthcare delivery systems. In fact, you might want to think of it that way, which is you take that definition and say, what are the ways in which we're implicitly or explicitly make decisions now that are going to, over the next few years, significant decisions in our lives that could be significantly influenced by AI.
But as a state, what do you care about? Or do you care about the risks that you create by implementation of AI? Or are you caring about potential revenue generation, efficiencies?
Right.
The scope is way too large for me. I'm trying to just understand even that perspective. Like, what is the responsibility the task force has to the state in providing recommendations? Is it going to be risk-based? Is it going to be generational growth, revenue generation growth? Is it going to be some other metric that exists?
That's a very good point. Yeah, what's the public agenda?
Yeah,
The state's agenda.
are we worried about impacts on people's lives? Impacts on, you said it before, jobs. That's important. I totally get that perspective. But what other policy metrics are there that are important and major drivers?
Are you in touch with the other states? Because they're puzzling through the same issue as well, as to what's the interest of the state government in AI. You said there's several other states that have launched task forces.
No, actually not.
Ryan, is there?
Yes, I can take the mic. So I know that I think it was Brian Chena, who's another member, had mentioned I think Washington State might have one. So I can look at more information on that. But what we're doing right now is pretty new. So I have not heard of too many task forces within like other state governments.
Yeah, I think, okay, so forgive me, I know this is on the record of me being wrong likely. The state of Washington is not a general AI task force. It's, if I'm not mistaken, it's looking at things such as use of data and AI, less so, not quite on privacy, but just use of data and AI and how to handle it. But beyond that, there hasn't been any other state that's there's been a couple of cities that have, like New York City has been working on a task force. San Francisco, of course, I don't know what they've called theirs, have put together so they could make that regulation banning facial recognition technology. But beyond that, the only other ones would be the national level, which, the EU is trying to put out their own code of ethics and regulations. Canada had published, at least on the ethics side, the ethical use of AI. But I think that was the extent of everything we found. Oh, and just back to the question on the scope, that is basically been the things that we're trying to gather, all the possibilities. And one of the reasons why we push forward with this, and also one of our current recommendations to have a standing committee on AI, is not that we're trying to push off all the work to them, but is to give them all their awareness, especially collected from you folks, of what are the things, what are the possible scopes that should be involved, and then they are aware of it, and then see how they focus down on what they need to do on that. Is that a fair thing to say, folks?
I mean, for me personally, as a Vermont resident, I'm always looking for ways of how the state could generate more efficient revenue, right? Because the state of Vermont's shrinking, people are leaving. So for me, I think a cool use of this task force would be the education and use of applying AI to Vermonters. Whether you're a farmer, an apple grower, any of those things, being able to utilize AI in a better way to optimize your efficiencies. I think that'd be a really cool place to start.
That's what we're hearing a lot of with the industry experts that we brought in at these general meetings. That was my take, at least. They had suggested education or investment in AI. So
yeah, I don't think there's enough trickle-down effect. So where does that trickle-down happen? Where would a farmer get their information about improving best practices? That usually happens at the state level, right? From my understanding, it typically happens through the state level. So.
Or they get it from their other, peers
Yeah.
in agriculture, or they see, like we saw, it's not quite AI, but it's close. Is automated milkers. Right, where the cows just decide for themselves actually to when they're going to walk up, and I thought that was pretty cool. And just in the distribution of different fertilizers on fields, depending on the yield, that's been tracked over time, and it's sort of artificial intelligence, right? Because it's making some decisions on on how much fertilizer to put down based on a whole bunch of other information over time.
Water, how much water?
Yeah, so, I mean, so what are
And they
all
learn from each
industries
other. Yeah.
that exist in Vermont that could be impacted by AI?
Yeah, and that could benefit and that could grow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I to be clear, it's like that's not what those kinds of opportunities we need to identify, but it's like this is going to have to be an ongoing effort, right, over time. Just like, you know, and maybe like the question is, where does it fit in state government? You know, like in transportation, we have a role, and you know, the different agencies have different roles, and we should probably be thinking about that too. Where's the best place to sort of for this to live and to start pushing it?
You can go different directions here, and there's so many things that you may not be able to go in all directions. One of them is what you pointed out with regulation. Okay, people need to know whether there's going to be regulation or not, and what role does the state have in regulating AI use? Okay, another one which I'm more focused on is social and economic development. And what are the opportunities, where the needs are that there's a significant chance over the next the planning horizon to use AI. So you can go both ways. I hope you do both ways. But at some point, you're going to have to ration how you're going to pay attention, what you're going to pay attention to.
I was just curious so are you taking recommendations to what the committee would look into in the future also?
Yes.
Because I'd be curious to know sort of maybe potential groups of people that might be excluded, like in the development of AI, do certain populations get disadvantaged because they can't afford things that the regulations might incentivize, or just sort of how AI will affect the people that might not be able to use it. And if those would be options built into policy to look at those vulnerable populations.
I think that's great. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges they have in digital health today is the socioeconomic biases that exist, right? And people who are impacted most and get the best, have the most impact due to those technologies aren't getting them because they're priced out.
I support what she said, but I also know as automation continues, we need people who are more and more educated, because the manual labor jobs are being taken over by automation, if not artificial intelligence. And so I think it would be worth considering, what do we need to do to help our educational system prepare for already the job market has changed markedly. And last time I checked, Vermont's expenditure per student on state colleges was like 49th out of the 50 states or something like that. So I think one way to help remediate the effect of automation is to look at how education should be changed, improved, or supported.
May I make another question? That's fine. So I guess I sort of have two different branches. So was the code of ethics that the EU has, is there any policy or sort of like how do they hold people accountable to that? Is that, would you also think that your code of ethics is something that companies or products sign on to, or as more of a overarching, recommendation?
Do you want to?
All right, sure.
So the code of ethics that we looked at from the EU is more of an overarching. It's guidelines and sort of guidance and, how you should perform. No policy or no regulations necessarily derived from it, no enforcement, yet derived from that. We felt it was just important to have it there. They have things like, the principles of AI use that, sort of the principle that the AI should do no harm, those elements of that. And we want that as overarching, and one of the push, although not quite the same as the education, you guys were just discussing, is, we also need to incorporate that, and we're looking at what does it take to incorporate, educating the ethics of AI, the ethical use of AI. That's where we stand at this point on those ethics and guidelines. We just felt it was an important thing that people are thinking about for any of the technologies going forward, I think. And it's, the medical devices field, of course, is very, very regulated. And then there's also a lot of ethics stuff driven there. How they get mapped from one to the other, especially AI as just a broad technology as opposed to, say, a focused medical device that might use AI, that's another thing that we struggle with.
I think one of the parts about that is, you talk about AI, but really what part of the ethics side of things includes the data management and having data management policies. That often gets lost, right? AI is just sort of the algorithm, the inputs and the outputs, but there's a huge amount of data that's being collected. And I think that's the part that's really, no one's really discussing.
I think the accountability question is interesting, and we have these principles and so on that are probably most people would agree with, and I know in other parts of government and policy we've established goals, and those goals are in statute. When you think about our land use goals, compact mixed use development surrounded by open countryside, right? That becomes that's sort of a visionary statement, and then over time you can kind of hang things on that and specifics on that. And so I could see a point, same thing with energy. We have some pretty, aspirational energy goals, and we're really pushing towards those in real ways. And so I could see eventually, I don't think we're quite there yet, but somehow these principles and, ethics somehow get codified in statute to start with. And then sort of how you address those depends on where you are and what you're doing. Right? If you're in the engineering field, you might sort of approach those in a certain way, and if you're in the health field, you might approach those in another way. But we're all sort of on the same page on, the overall goals of what we're trying to achieve.
And my last thing I just wanted to throw out was it would be interesting to know Vermont specific implications of AI, like it's something that might not apply to other places it's been developed, or not meant for colder climates, are not meant for this sort of use, and I think there's no way of really knowing its full intended use and how it would apply in the long term here. So maybe that force could look into sort of what Vermont adds the spin to it, so we can anticipate potential reactions to that.
Do you have any thoughts on what those unique Vermont things are that?
Better maple syrup.
Yeah.
How about snowmaking? With better weather prediction, I imagine they are able to more efficiently make snow through less effort because they know snow is coming. Is that it? Is that?
Well, that's.
I'd look at rural environments where there's a crisis or a impending crisis of shortage of qualified people. And you could think of two things. One is voluntary firefighters. Mm-hmm. The other one is doctors. And there are a dozen others. And to see whether AI, whether there's any solutions here, or at least find out people who are thinking about that. In fact, just a thought here, I'm a business writer, so I do a lot of reaching out around the country to find people who know something about something. And it is actually much more difficult than one would think it would be. If you could find a dozen people or a dozen research shops in the country who are thinking about AI in a way that the legislature or a staff member in the legislature should be in touch with, that could be enormously valuable. because otherwise it's just so hard to find find people. I've been trying to find someone who understands telemedicine in rural settings, and I've come up short. Finding somebody who understands rural healthcare, not simply a certain kind of condition, but rural healthcare and how telemedicine works. It's very hard to find people who know that.
Let me talk to you. It's not me, but I have somebody, yeah, who's local, yeah. Side. One of the things that's what we're trying to also ask is, we are tasked with finding what are the Vermont specific things. I remember one of our discussions, I think, Joe, this was maybe early last year. It was because of, transportation with the rural, it says, health services, emergency services. If we have autonomous cars and that possibility, that, if it actually works well in a rural setting, how we set it up properly, now we can have an efficiency where, lives can be better saved. So these are things that had, at least for me on the committee, got me doing this, is that, what kind of, for lack of a better term, aspirational policies, aspirational AI things that would allow us to achieve this. What do we need to do? And it's actually, I think, one of the things that had popped in my head back then was your comment about, broadband for all, the rural fiber, and, what hasn't it been able to do to achieve it? But if we get ahead of the game, this is sounding very naive, but if we can get ahead of the game with the policies and hearing what folks think about things that we can do to enable it, and especially for Vermont Specific, that's the things we also want to hear.
Who is concerned with job loss or their job loss? Is that, or does anybody have anything to say about job loss?
My own gut reaction is that it's a net job gain in the kind of environment that we're in. Or it will solve a problem where there's an extreme shortage of workers.
And that's focused on Vermont and our situation?
I'm thinking Vermont, yeah. That's my frame of reference. Right. Other is going to be a neutral to plus on job growth, and it will cover for extreme shortages of workers.
Where's the job growth?
It'll be in complementary services, in financial services and insurance. It would appear to be you're going to eliminate 20% of the staff. Let's take a mundane area like claims processing, auto claims. But you can also argue that it actually is going to create different kinds of other jobs that will complement the service that's being done by AI. I'm just speculating here. The work that was done by that Oxford group, those Oxford people who talked about, I think, a 47% reduction. If you look at the jobs that they're talking about, and you think them through, there's like an 89% possibility of a elimination of actuaries or something like that. That could, but you think it through, and there could be some complementary jobs that are created, or a redefinition of the job.
I like the question. I'm trying to wrap my head around what those could be. So I'm thinking about, when I think about AI, that's one part of it. Big data is another part, and we need to collect big data. So that means sensorized systems, ecological systems. And so is there an opportunity, as you're describing, to
well, there's that whole issue of labeling. What's it called, labeling? Yeah. And so instead of whole companies being created in India to label, whether that's a growth or not, I doubt we're going to have companies in Vermont that are going to do that.
I guess two things I'll add is I think we've heard from one of the speakers is, the workers that are in the operations side, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence and machines taking over the operations side. Those operational workforce may have to transition to maintenance, the maintenance side of maintaining machines. That's one thought. Additionally, I think we heard from the construction industry that they can't find enough qualified employees, so they're having to resort to AI to get the work done.
Did you have something to say?
Yeah, there was a pattern that's related to my kind of education earlier, but as automation increases, the manufacturing jobs and such have been decreasing. And at one time in an office, you had a secretary, a stenographer, a receptionist, etc. And they've all been replaced by one person by a computer. So there's some kinds of jobs that are decreasing, but yes, we're becoming more of an information economy. There are new jobs being created, but those new jobs require computer skills.
Yeah, back to the dairy farm example, one of the questions we had was how many of the low-paying farmhand jobs got eliminated? No data on that. I mean, of course, the company didn't have anything like that, but then the discussion, of course, goes to, do you retrain them? What is the retraining? What do we retrain them for to fit them in, as opposed to we're just going to generically retrain them?
Yeah, the job of scribe. Anyone here run into the scribes in hospitals? That's a new job. It's created by electronic health record systems, which is so complicated that the doctors won't do them. So you have a new job for scribe.
It's a person that pushes around the cart with a computer and sort of.
That's right. So
yeah, they're following.
The doctor.
Yeah.
I actually think that's a negative development, but that's just me.
Yeah.
Technology making it worse.
I have something sort of off topic, but I just wasn't sure if it would ever get mentioned, just sort of the energy implications and how grid systems fit into all of this. I don't know how it would be affected, but just sort of, would it play any role in safety or security to have smaller grids when you're looking at all of these different systems going on? Or
Are you talking about the impact of AI on the energy grid systems, or AI to work on the energy grid systems?
Oh, the impact of the system.
Okay, so like if you have more AI, more complex things, are going to be chewing up more resources. So okay.
And I don't know, or just sort of the difference that energy systems will interface with AI as it grows, and reliability of those systems based on grid strength and reliability.
And network connectivity.
Yeah.
Part of it too.
Exactly. And I know, a lot of parts of Vermont don't have reliable connections too, so do certain things have to advance before AI can be reliable in these places?
It's interesting. So it seems like what you're saying is, is that an obstacle to AI expanding in Vermont? Is that what?
It might be that it can't expand until other thresholds are met.
Right.
But AI has so many different applications that there's probably a place it could be applied already.
Yeah, it sounds like infrastructure implications and infrastructure requirements.
Are there significant state challenges and obstacles that the state is dealing with that AI can help solve? Is it another way to look at the problem? I don't know what those are. Is it planning issues? Is there any number of things.
A good example would be title search, title definition of who owns that land, okay, and who has access. And it would strike me if you could feed, and here we're getting into really the data, the underlying issues is that you're absorbing massive amounts of data, and you put that into a machine learning environment, and you're going to have a very confident prediction as to whether there's a title problem or not. Insurance regulation would be another example. Tax returns would strike me that there must be some other states, I would hope there are other states that are more resourced, that are figuring out how to use AI as a way of validating tax returns.
Can AI be used to achieve some of the aspirational goals of achieving, lower emissions?
Right.
Things like that.
Right.
Are there major initiatives that it can be applied to?
Yeah, I mean, I can, in my own area in transportation, it's, even forgetting about automated vehicles, but, we're constantly trying to do more with less. And yet we have this aging, real hard infrastructure, concrete, steel, bridges, pavement, that kind of stuff, which maybe isn't as exciting to people, but it's just really, our economy depends on it, And so we're trying to manage those assets in a way that as efficiently as possible, and just understanding how fast does a bridge deteriorate, and it's, they last 80 to 100 years, but there's strategic times that you can make investments in these bridges and spend less money and extend its lifespan and save millions of dollars, right?
It's a structural health number.
Yeah. And actually I had an intern working on this, and he was actually building a little neural network, and I didn't realize it until I started learning a little bit more about it, but it was like bringing in all these facts, because bridges are pretty complicated, really. They look kind of static, but there's a lot going on there. And so understanding how they deteriorate and when we should, what sort of interventions we should do at the, we like to say making the right investment at the right time. It's a great slogan, but it's harder, harder to do than it sounds. So I think that's a problem that it can help us solve. And I am actually pretty confident it will help us solve that. And, as our in general, thinking about transportation needs as we become older, and we're dispersed in Vermont. I mean, we do have some, small concentrated towns, but many of us live all over the place, right? And, our ability to stay independent and age in place and all of that is really depends on our ability to drive more than anything else. And so, whether self-driving cars can fill that need in the future, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is kind of interesting, because do we really want, people as they age, even if they can get rides places, should they really be isolated? We have this weird way of isolating people as they get older in little pockets here and there, right? But the promise is it can address safety in a big way. Sort of gotten to the limits of what regular conventional cars can do as far as safety goes, and we sort of, fatalities were dropping over many years, and now they're just starting to inch up again because we've kind of reached a certain limit, and behavior's huge. Human behavior's huge when it comes to crashes. So that's like when you talk about a need, and that's not just in Vermont. There's 37,000 plus people die every year on the highways in the United States, and that's a huge number, right? And so we're just in the industry really, desperate maybe is the right word for a way to start to bend that curve again. And so that's where the promise is.
And just in that automotive and transportation side of things, that's a good example of industry where there's NHTSA regulation and then there's state regulations.
Yeah.
How do they play together? What is that dynamic?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the role is that at the federal level, they regulate the equipment, the motor vehicle equipment, right, which is what NHTSA does. And at the state, and also the local level, at the state we regulate drivers, licenses, vehicles, registration, safety inspections. But we also build and take care of the infrastructure. We have traffic laws, what's the speed limit, that kind of stuff. Where can you put a crosswalk in? And those you were kind of asking about regulation, like what's the right role of state government in the regulation of AI, and it really will depend on the field, right? But in transportation, there has been legislation proposed at the federal level on automated vehicles, but it would basically preserve those traditional roles of the federal government would regulate equipment because that equipment is everywhere. Mm-hmm. And the locals regulate how it operates on their systems. And I don't know if that's a model that sort of is applied. I don't know, when I think about health, I mean, that's just, does it really matter if you live in Vermont or Kansas on how you're treated and so on? So, or criminal justice is another huge one. I mean, there's just basic human rights that are universal. Shouldn't really matter where you happen to live, right? And so I think the regulation really depends on the area that you're talking about. Yes.
Potentially another angle that the future committee could go is, instead of just looking at regulating it, more like how could it develop, if the direction is to encourage it in the state, like encourage the development of maybe a team that does look at Vermont specific issues and how to get AI developers to work on those. I'm thinking if there is any place of intervention for climate resiliency or flood resilience, you know, things that we are already tackling in different sectors, like energy efficiency, obviously, but to bring in projects ourselves rather than wait for them to be externally developed and then applied to the state. It would be an interesting approach to have Vermont be a hub for those sort of developments, if that makes sense.
You know, one way that could happen is to leverage with Dartmouth or UVM. If you had, you have some talent pool there, which is interested in embracing an agenda for the state.
I think building off of that, you mentioned VTC. Is that where you teach? Yes. I think that's a great place. We're trying to build a workforce that's agile, that can work in these different fields, and that type of investment would pay back in terms of growing a workforce, having those capabilities and skills, implementing it, and executing some major initiatives. It's kind of a cool vision. Thank you.
Anything else anybody wants to talk about? What's on their mind? Subject that we didn't cover, or risk, benefits?
Curious where y'all have identified AI currently being used in the state of Vermont beyond the examples you gave about transportation. Is it being used by police in any capacity?
I wasn't at that meeting. Or one of you?
I was there, and I'm not sure I can really recall everything. That there was some facial recognition questions, I think, that were being discussed, but I'm not sure it's really being deployed anywhere yet. So sorry, I just...
That's okay. Was that testimony published on the legislature's website?
Are all of our minutes on the... So there is a website, and I think all of our meeting notes and minutes are on that website. And we had, I'm not sure it was the chief from the city of Burlington, it was chief or like deputy chief, and he came and testified, and yeah, I mean, so you can find some information there. I think there might have even been some attorneys, that knew something about criminal justice that came. That was one of our topic areas, was criminal justice, and we definitely got some testimony.
Let me take that.
Has AI been used concretely across the state anywhere else that you have found?
The agriculture example, the dairy farms with, the automated milking, those were in use. Oops, that's all I was going to say.
Those are specifically being
That's specifically used in Vermont, yes. There are farms that are being used. I unfortunately can't name anything offhand, although one of our committee members or task force members knew somebody personally who was employing one of those.
I mean, like I said earlier, well, I guess, again, it depends. You said that the definition of AI is sort of a moving target, right? As something becomes old hat, if you will, or it becomes institutionalized, for some reason that's not considered AI. I don't know why. I guess AI is sort of seen as just always something that's cutting edge. But there's kind of early AI, and then there's the future AI. And it seemed like there were a lot of examples of what you might call early AI happening in the state across a lot of different sectors. And they just might be algorithms, right, that sort of are making decisions. And if that's kind of if that's your definition of AI, they're given, you put information in and a decision comes out, then there's quite a bit of that going on.
Mm-hmm. And do you all have a working code of ethics? Or is this just an idea that you want to present?
I believe there's a draft. I have not seen it yet.
We're working on, this is the document, which you can take if you would like.
Okay.
And it's just the, it's from Europe. And it's really just, we're just looking at this as a reference. But it seems to lay out some principles and guidelines and ethics that seem very reasonable, but this is kind of one piece of information that we're looking at right now that.
So there's no drafted code from your task force yet, but is that expected in the final report?
Yeah, actually, so we have a drafted version, which is a summary of that code of ethics. And the plan so far, we're moving forward so far to have that ethics as part of the report. That code of ethics is part of the final report also.
I just wanted to say, like, a lot of you guys are interested in the topic. Like, if you have any questions or any like materials or resources that you find useful in this topic, just like contact me. I think my name is on like the or whatever's been going out in the media. It has my email on it. You can send me any documents or anything you find important. Right now, we're using this I don't know what to call it, like kind of app, Slack. Yeah. And that's being used to just communicate with other task members and being like, oh, here's an article that we might find.
The Slack's available to anybody, I think.
Slack is available to the public, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the idea was you could kind of just see whatever raw information that, it's a little messy, just,
Yeah.
you know.
And it's in a terrible font color.
Blue on blue?
Yeah.
It's more,
What's your schedule now between now and when you report to, and who do you report to?
we report to the legislature.
Where in the legislature? Is there a committee?
It's the House, like Energy and, if you want to look it up.
And when do you report to them?
It'll be January 15th of 2020, I believe. The final report's due.
Okay, 15th. That means you're going to have to start writing by within a month. Right?
There's been some writing done already, some text, but it's still really rough. Yeah.
And yeah, the final report is going to be due to the Senate Committee on Government Operations and the House Committee on Energy and Technology on or before January 15th, 2020.
Okay.
I assume there'd be a follow-up hearing.
Can you repeat again what your charge is? I think there are about 4 things.
We were tasked to provide a summary of the development and current use of AI in Vermont, provide a proposal for the definition of artificial intelligence if needed, a proposal for state regulation of artificial intelligence if needed, a proposal for the responsible and ethical development of artificial intelligence in the state, including an identification of the potential risks and benefits of such development, and then finally, a recommendation on whether the General Assembly should establish a permanent commission to study the artificial intelligence field.
Okay, cool. Where would the second one, can you read that second one again?
AI definition?
No, it has to do with how it's being used.
Summary of the development and current use of AI in Vermont.
Okay, if there is a proposition that the state, not that you would necessarily endorse it, but that you wanted to put in a number of propositions that have been made, which, for example, would be greater investment in education on AI. Where would that, not that you endorse it, but you just say that that's one of the things. Where does that fit in? Does that fit into the first item?
I think that would fall under item 4, a proposal for the responsible and ethical development of AI. You're talking about investment?
Okay, fine.
Yeah, and what I just wanted to add is those are the 5 that we're supposed to report on. Last meeting, the minutes are going to be up soon. They're just being approved right now. But the last meeting we really talked about, is there anything else that we want to talk about in this report? And one of them, and I've been hearing it in the audience tonight, is education. So that's one topic that we're looking at, and I forget the name of the committee that was made at the meeting, but they're going to be looking at some more topics and that might fit into the report.
Right. But that section on responsible and ethical development of AI, that's a pretty big umbrella.
I was just curious if you had any other anticipated forms of outreach, like a survey that you might send to people that can't attend these meetings, or if you've posted any flyers up to get people that might not have access to. I mean, I heard about this through my work, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of people in my generation might not have heard about it or might have opinions that are in school right now. So is there a separate way that you're soliciting comments?
So for any general public comments, my email has been used. People have contacted me. I've had people contacting me from all over the state. I'm acting as the administrative coordinator for the group, so I might not know the answer myself, but I can always point you in the right direction. We've been trying our best to record all the meetings like we are tonight, and that'll either go on TV or it'll go. Orca Media in Montpelier has been recording our meetings when we've had them, and those are available through their site, which are free. But just any other questions can be delegated to me.
Do you know what your Slack URL is?
I can talk with you after the meeting about joining.
I was just going to suggest that if there's time or space or capacity to have a survey go out to people, you might get a wider variety of responses. Not that they would be used in the same way, but if you're just collecting as much raw data as possible from people.
Yeah, we can certainly look into doing a survey. I'll write that down.
I think it's a good point. I mean, I work in the tech space, and I heard about this through the Norwich listserv. Yeah, not through normal channels of, my tech colleagues. So I think you're missing a big chunk of the population.
Yeah. Okay.
Even more reason to have an ongoing commission that is, maybe builds a following and continues the discussion,
So what's the outcome after the presentation of legislation? Like, you either continue with this initiative and continue to drive down this path, or is it stop?
Well, I think it will depend on what the legislature wants to do. I think we are leaning towards recommending the commission. To me, that's probably going to be the most actionable item that comes out of what we do. And so I think that'll be the question, is if whether or not there's support to do that, because it's that takes resources too, right? You can't just establish a commission and without providing some resources to support it. And we've been one of our members has been looking at a couple other models of how commissions have been set up and how they've been staffed. And one's been housed inside a state agency. Another one, I think it's the
it's either trade or woman.
It's the
National Trade?
No, it's not that one. I don't want to say the wrong name, but it's a commission related to women, and maybe it's the Committee on Women, and so I believe they have like an executive director and maybe just that. I mean, just even having someone full-time dedicated that can coordinate with other people can kind of keep things moving forward. And I think that's what this issue needs. It needs some this is not our full-time job, obviously, right? All of us on this committee, we kind of come from different backgrounds and so on. But so if a commission is set up, it needs support, and it needs someone focusing on it, full-time. So that's probably going to be the question, is like, can that be supported? Is there some money that could pay for that?
Yes. Do you know what New Hampshire's commitment to studying all of this is as well?
Yeah, so I do not. I can certainly look into that, though. If that's a question that you're asking, I can do some research on it tomorrow and see if there's any appropriate contacts and get back to you.
I just think, so from a Montpelier, Burlington perspective, that's a very Vermont-centric perspective. And when we think about things like autonomous vehicle regulation, and you live 1 mile or work 1 mile from New Hampshire, as most of the people in the Upper Valley do, that regulation or policy needs to be good for one state and the other. And I think there's been similar sort of conflicts of interest when we think about marijuana regulation or other things where Mass and Vermont have it, but not New Hampshire. What does that mean? So the issues that you're talking about are very interesting and rural specific, but by the nature of our geography and the imaginary lines of our states, that we're all citizens of like two separate areas. And I would be very curious just to know what's happening in the bordering states and regions.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely very interesting. I grew up like right on the New Hampshire line, so like I'm definitely familiar with that. And I can certainly just talk to someone in New Hampshire and see what's going on with artificial intelligence.
Well, you mean as even an ongoing, like how do we coordinate and on the variety of AI issues over time, right?
I think one of the big discussions that we were talking about with autonomous driving, the one application for it for rural communities is our system of advanced transit here in the Upper Valley, which our brown line goes right through, multiple states numerous times a day. So how is it, that might be regulated on a more federal level, but that is one of the big things that we would be thinking of, because that's one of the probably the most interesting common applications, because that doesn't have a workforce that could go 7 days at this time, and it has a need that could go 7 days.
I am working with my counterparts in the surrounding states on automated vehicle issues in general, and we're trying to figure out like where are those cross-state line issues and what we should be doing about them. I mean, it's also this. We've been working together for maybe almost 2 years now, right? So it hasn't been that long, and that's how kind of new this is. But yeah, I think it's a great point.
I also think the same regulation should be thought of when someone said telemedicine, where DH is, who is the largest healthcare provider for, I believe, both states, that or one of the largest employers in both states, that telemedicine is something that they're investing heavily into, and thinking about that for not just general practice, but psychiatric practice, what's happening when one state is administering that type of work, and it's reaching people who are utilizing that in another state.
Any other thoughts, comments? Should we wrap it up? We should thank the Montshire Museum, too, for letting us use this space. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right.
That's it?
I guess that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
So is it, I mean, you know something that actually, who's that?
So there was a